Greetings, everyone. Thanks for all the well wishes on my video from a week ago. Some of you were really worried that I had throat cancer or something. Obviously not. As bad as it sounded, as uncomfortable as it was, mono is usually not that serious, and it wasn't in my case. Um, so I'm still a little bit sick. I'm not 100% by any means, but I'm feeling much better. Being a little bit more active, doing a little bit more interactions socially with free staters and the like. And I definitely think that there are some interesting topics to cover in that regard. But for this video, I actually wanted to talk about something kind of unrelated to that, and maybe tangentially related to the fact that I had an illness, because it is about healthcare. This is inspired by a very popular video that was making the rounds, not just on YouTube, but on Facebook, and it wasn't actually even published on YouTube, about healthcare. Seemed like a pretty intelligent, very earnest, very sincere guy who was just not coming forward with a solution so much, but just putting out there some of the problems with healthcare. And some of them I agreed with, some of them I didn't. But one of them, which is kind of a cornerstone, and it's a common objection that you hear, is that there's certain aspects of healthcare, of the healthcare industry, which make it not like other industries. It's not something that normal competition, normal market interactions can really help very much, and so it should be approached differently. It shouldn't be approached the same way as, say, food or cars or anything else. And that is that there is inelastic demand, is what the way he put it. And the way that he means that is that if you're going to die, then you have to have the medicine, and so you're going to pay whatever price. That there's not any bargaining power. There's no haggling that's ever going to happen. And so the producers have the ability to dictate price in a way that they don't in other industries, the production of other goods. And so they can dictate whatever price that they want, and that's why prices are so high. And he kind of mentioned, and I'm not going to put a link to it because I can't remember where it was. This guy wasn't coming out and just saying we need to have the government run everything, but he was saying, well, of course, the government then has the ability, as a consumer of a good, to dictate the price, which is correct, although there's consequences to it dictating prices. And so I don't think he formally said that was the solution, but that's kind of the implication. Now, there's a couple problems, though, with this assumption that there's inelastic or static demand in healthcare. And there's also a couple problems with the idea that because even assuming that somebody has to have a procedure, then that the producer can dictate a price. I think the first problem is that prices on a market are based on arbitrage on the market, and they incorporate all the market information of all the consumers, and so the price isn't based on what's the consumer who has the highest possible need in the most extreme circumstances. That's not what the price of a good is going to reflect. It's going to reflect that, in addition to people who have a less pressing need for the good. And so there are lots of situations, let's say, when you really have to get a tank of gas. Maybe you're driving to a hospital, maybe you're driving to a work site, maybe there's some kind of emergency, maybe it's the only gas station for 100 miles in the direction you're going to go, something like that, where you could come in and be like, I really need to fill up my tank, and the cashier, looking at you, realizing your need, could say, okay, well, it's not going to be $3 a gallon, it's going to be $8 a gallon, because I know that you will pay, or $10 even, because I know that you will be willing to pay that. Because who hasn't been in a situation where they wouldn't be willing to pay, double, triple, quadruple the market rate because they had some kind of emergency or dire need? And we're talking. This is only an example of gas. It could be just about anything else. The problem with that there then is, so then you pay that much because you're willing to. The next customer comes in who doesn't have a dire need, who isn't about to head out on a 100-mile trip without any other gas stations, or doesn't have any kind of pressing urgency. And the teller says, okay, you got to pay $10 as well. And they're going to say, no thanks, I'll just go to another gas station, or I'll wait, or whatever, because it's not that pressing of a need. The teller can't say, listen, that other person really had this important need that they couldn't possibly wait for. They had to pay a higher price, so you need to pay a higher price as well. They don't value it the same, so they're not willing to bear that higher price. And people say that's gas, and that's what any other scenarios you want to bring up, but it's not your life. Well, first of all, in healthcare, not every procedure is a life or death procedure. Again, the price on the market is not going to, the price of healthcare so aggregated is not going to be a reflection of the most dire need. Many people, like myself, my illness was extremely inconvenient. I didn't need to be hospitalized for it. I could have been hospitalized for it had I wanted to. I could have gone to the emergency room. I could have paid for any number of other services that I didn't, that I was able to do without. And the price of those goods and services isn't going to reflect just the people who can't possibly go without it or else they'll die. It's going to reflect also the people who could have it be elective. I don't know what fraction of healthcare services are syllogistically always 100% of the time a matter of life or death. And my guess is that it's a very, very small number, if any. In fact, it's probably debatable. Because even in the life or death situations, even paying for the service, there's still the chance that you could die. And so it's not like by funding the money, you're guaranteeing that you'll survive. So there's always kind of a probability scale of how likely is death, how likely is survival. And a treatment is only going to be somewhere on that scale. It's never going to be one way or all the way one way or all the way the other. The idea that all healthcare costs can be driven by the minority of cases that are actually life or death doesn't make a lot of sense to me. The other one is that the argument assumes that people value their lives not only in some objective equal sense, but in an objective equal sense to all other goods and services and to money. And I just don't think this is true. If we could have an objective measure of value, and we don't, it seems highly unlikely that people would value their lives identically, either on their own or relative to other goods or services. And it seems highly unlikely because people's behavior indicates that they don't all value their lives to the same degree. And there are, kind of really evocative examples that kind of illustrate this. The ones I like to use are skydivers or bungee jumpers or base jumpers or deep sea divers, cave divers, free divers, the people who don't use scuba gear but will hold their breath and take a sled down 400 feet into the ocean. Basically, those activities, they illustrate it well because all those activities have a very high probability of death that's understood at the outset. And most people, for that reason, never take part in these activities. And there are other people who actively do so. And they clearly, now it doesn't mean that they quote-unquote want to die, but it means that they are willing to have a high risk of death for the fulfillment of some other end, whether that's thrill-seeking or fulfillment or something else. And that clearly indicates that there's a difference in the way they evaluate the value of their life relative to these other goods than you or I. But I think that illustrates it, but it's hardly like these are exceptional circumstances, and most people have, kind of like an identical value of their life, and then there's just a couple thrill seekers who don't, because while those are more dramatic, the same is true for somebody who rides a motorcycle, who engages in vigorous but risky exercise, a person who gets in a lot of street brawls, a person who's uh, you know who goes on maybe long hikes in the woods all by themselves. Like, there's lots of things you can do that are risky, that are that more safety conscious, more life centered people would not do. And it's also very clear, I think, when you start to get to people who are older or who are very sick, who make decisions quite regularly, in fact every day, hundreds or thousands of times, where they say, you know what, even though a particular treatment may offer me an increased probability of the extension of my life to a certain point, it's not worth it to me, and they don't go through with the treatment. That's not only is that not rare, that's extremely common once you get to a certain stage in life. I know it's happened to some of my relatives, when they got to the point where, yes, they could continue living if they kept getting blood transfusions or kept having surgical procedures. But at some point, you say you're in your 80s or your 90s, and you pretty much lived your life, and everybody that you care about has got out of the nest and is on their own 2 feet and living their own lives, and it's like, why would I diminish my the resources that I have at my disposal just so that I can live a few more years or a few more months at the lowest standard of living that I have had in my entire life, other than when I was a baby, essentially. And I've had family members in that situation who say, I don't want the next transfusion. Now, if they were 20 years younger, they might say different and say they do want it. But clearly the idea that everybody will always choose the choice that increases the likelihood, that maximizes the likelihood that they will continue their life and that they'll do so at any price, is false. Is false. So I don't think that you can carry that assumption. However, even if we did, let's assume that my quibbles about an objective value and the fact that people don't actually value their lives relative, in some absolute sense, or relative to goods the same way. It's assuming that it's true that everybody values their life absolutely, that they will expend any resources at their disposal, regardless of their circumstances. Does the argument hold true then? Because even though I don't agree with that, it seems sort of commonsensical, and even maybe my objection is either totally wrong or maybe it's only applicable in a couple of people, and the vast majority are going to, go to great lengths to choose life. So isn't my example false? And the answer to that is no, because it ignores one other thing. Even if you have to have a procedure, it's an open question of who gives you the procedure. And when that gets factored in, if there is competition, and there's no reason other than government intervention to assume that there would not be competition, at least in the vast majority of medical procedures, including life-saving ones, the fact that there's more than one provider means that they are going to compete with each other in trying to get your business. So, let's say that in a very simplified situation, you need a procedure X. It's the only thing that can save you, and it has a very high probability of saving you. And hospital A says, we'll give it to you, and since you'll die if you don't give it to us, we're going to charge you $250,000. And you agree, you mortgage your house, you go into debt, whatever else, to pay for it, or you're wealthy and you pay for it. The hospital B comes along and says, okay, we could also give you Operation Y, and we'll do it, and instead of $250,000, we'll do it for $200,000. Does that mean that they're doing this because they love you as a customer, because they're philanthropic? Which, by the way, are not motivations that we can discount as never having taken place, but we shouldn't all either count on them always being there to take care of everybody. Let's just say, people make this really stupid kind of conclusion that why would they charge less? They're always going to charge more. No, because if they can lower their price, they can increase their market share and make more money than they would otherwise. If they charge exactly the same as the next company, then they can get, exactly that fraction. Say if there's 2 hospitals, half the customers. If they decrease their prices even $1,000, say, so $249,000, it's not like, well, now they still are only getting half the market, and so but they're making $1,000 less per procedure, so they're losing. No, they won't only get half the market. They'll get probably all of the market, or very close to all of it, and so they'll actually make more money. And this is where kind of liberal logic relies on 2 mutually exclusive mythological realities. On the one hand, you have corporations who only care about profits, who always are undercutting their competitors. If we were having a discussion about monopoly or about Walmart, or about competition, they would allege up and down, oh no, it's terrible, we can't have that, because they'll always be trying to undercut each other. They'd be doing cutthroat competition. They'd be slashing prices to underbid their competitors until they had a monopoly. Again, which never happens in that way ever. But then when we're having a discussion about healthcare, all of a sudden companies don't care about profits. Their number one priority, presumably, since they're not going to compete with each other, is solidarity with their competitors. The highest priority of a for-profit hospital in liberal logic, in the liberal mythos, is they get along with all the other hospitals, they form a cartel, and it never even occurs to them that they can make more money by undercutting their competitors. The only thing that they care about, the highest priority, is either to screw the consumers. So they'll go for lower profits if it allows them to screw consumers, or co-equal with this. Depends. Neither one makes any sense, so I'm not sure which one is the one liberals are imagining more. Or solidarity with their competitors, drives them to not lower prices, not to undercut their competition, but to maintain the same prices as their competition. Again, that's not the capitalist, corporation, company, for-profit, corporations that exist whenever we're talking about monopoly or anything else for that matter. But when we're talking about medical care, suddenly that's the zeitgeist, is that's what they believe. They don't believe in their own profit margins. They believe in maintaining some kind of high price, even at the expense, and that's the thing, it comes at the expense of their profit margin. If they can undercut, especially if there's a huge disconnect, if there's a huge variance between the marginal costs of providing the service and the price actually charged. I mean, look, if it's a high cost to provide the service, it's going to be a high cost to provide the service. But if there's a huge difference between the two, then the potential to lower prices significantly would entail a much higher market share. Indeed, if it's really a $5,000 procedure and the cartel price is $250,000, you can make huge profits by just lowering it $100,000. Suddenly you're going to get all the market share because you're 2.5 times cheaper than the rest of the cartel. You're still charging 20 times the actual price. That's a pretty high profit margin with 100% of the market. You'd be hurting your competitors, you'd be helping yourself. Now, people say, well, that's still too much. Well, in real life, what would happen is their competitors would pretty quickly say, okay, now we're going to lower it. They go to 95, then you go to 90, and the process doesn't go to 0. It doesn't go to nothing, at least not normally. It actually can in the right circumstances, but it usually isn't. But it's going to approach the discounted marginal revenue product, that is the actual cost of the procedure to the provider. That's what it's going to approach, as it does for anything else. Even though the consumers might be in a position where they have to purchase it, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because They have to purchase it from someone, and it doesn't have to be you. And if you're going to simply be a haughty and say, I'm going to charge whatever I want because you have to have it, then your price is going to be up here, your competitor's price is going to be down here, and you're not going to sell anything, and they're going to be making bank. And your only option at that point isn't to say, you really need this procedure a lot, so we're going to charge more. No, you have to charge less or provide a better service or whatever. But that's how this doesn't really make a lot of sense. Even granting that there's an inelastic demand, which I think is interesting, by the way. If you actually believe there's an inelastic demand for medical services, then you have to try and explain why are prices going up all the time? If demand is essentially not changing, which is what that means to say it has an elastic demand, then it has to be the supply side that's causing the rising in prices. And I'd be curious to see, what an inelastic demand, or what their answer is to why prices then are going up all the time. That's just kind of a side topic. So, yeah, the competition now. There's going to be competition. If there's profit to be made, there's an incentive for producers to exist in the market. It's not like this isn't like an assumption that free marketers just kind of, let's assume that there are unicorns, and let's assume that there that there's altruism, and let's assume that they're philanthropic, and let's assume that there's perfect knowledge, that consumers have 100% perfect knowledge. These are not made up assumptions. If there is a demand, if there are people who value the service, aka in this case, people who value medical procedures that will keep them alive, and I think that's syllogistically true, but maybe someone will debate that, then there is a profit incentive for people to provide the good or service. Now that people have kind of tried to that's careful wording on my part, because people will say things like, oh, you're assuming that because people want it that it will exist, so people want to have time travel, so there'll be time travel. No, I said there's a profit incentive for people to try and produce it. That doesn't, if there's an incentive, if people are demanding something that can't be produced, like say time travel or space travel or something like that. I mean, like not Virgin Galactic space travel, but like warp travel to other galaxies or whatever. Okay, doesn't mean that there's going to be a capitalist who's able to actually fill that demand. But if it is possible to do, and it can be done in a way cheap enough that the people who are demanding the service can afford to pay, then it will be done. And there is no reason to assume that, only one provider could ever figure out how to do it. When we're talking about medical procedures, that's rarely, if ever, going to be the case. Now, and there's more than one way to skin a cat. I mean, you could have hospitals, you could have medical services that are coming from co-op. There's lots of things that could happen here to where consumers are going to have lots of options. Now, we can also have a debate about what about the person who is in a position where they can't actually pick and choose. There's kind of two versions of this. One is because they lack the information to make a decision. And the thing is, you don't have to be an expert medical person to make a decision that's at least somewhat informed. I had this debate with a liberal who's a doctor at one point, and he said, you as an individual don't have the knowledge to know to shop around. And I think that's bullshit, because all you need to know is what kind of procedure you need, or what symptoms you have, or what ailment you have, and you can just call around and ask people, how much does this cost? You don't have to know how to do brain surgery to call a brain surgeon and ask, how much do you charge for this operation? And the idea that they're going to, I mean, right now that doesn't work very well because of the way the government's fucked it up. But like, if you are a brain surgeon and your business is to give people brain surgeries, you might not be able to tell them over the phone the first time they call exactly how much it's going to cost, but you'd be able to give them a ballpark or say what information they would need to come to an estimate, and you can call around and see what's cheaper, what's not cheaper Just like you don't need to be a mechanic to call around to ask people how much they're going to charge, to fix your brakes or your motor or whatever other, item, or your computer. You don't need to know how to build a computer to get estimates on how much it's going to cost to rebuild or to fix yours anymore. Like the specialized knowledge that people lack goes way beyond medical care. All right, we live in a high division of labor society where any given person is they're going to know less than probably 1/100th of 1% of the consumer goods that they use. Are they going to have enough knowledge to actually be able to, say, build them or understand the process behind building them? And so, there's no special kind of change there. The other kind of one is, what if you're catatonic? What if you're unconscious? You can't shop around if you just got in a car accident and you're zonked out. Two things. One, you could have a prior arrangement of where you wanted to go. Two, if you have a situation where there is competition and where prices, more providers are having to lower prices in order to get the customers who aren't in your position. The customers, they break a leg and they can call around versus the guy who broke a leg because he got in a car accident and now he doesn't know what's going on. All their prices are going to be lower for that reason. Again, it's based on the arbitrage of the market. They can't just charge a higher price because you're necessarily unconscious. So again, I don't think that that's something that is a factor. I mean, the fact that you have hospitals that are going to be dealing with people who are unconscious, that is actually going to raise their prices some, but not like, okay, this person is in a super dire situation, so we can charge whatever we want, hence we can charge whatever we want to everybody. No, it's going to be an arbitrage of everybody who comes in, and not everybody is in such a terrible situation. Not everybody is, this is my only option. And so, prices reflect that. Prices don't, I'm almost tempted to go into a little tangent here about like why that is. Like why don't you have a provider who's going to have different prices and say, oh, you're rich, we're charging you twice as much, and then you're poor. There's reasons that doesn't work either. So basically for the same reasons. I mean, then all of the people who, everyone is going to classify themselves as being poor, or go to the place that says that they're not going to do that. If you have one hospital that says, well, we're going to charge the same for these procedures, whatever your material resources are, then everybody's going to go there, including the rich people. And the other hospital that has different pricing systems based on ability to pay, they're not going to have any customers. So, and then of course the other kind of element of this is, cartels can't work on the market. There's too much of a profit incentive for at the least the more efficient members of the cartel to undercut the other members. Now, if you're an inefficient member of a cartel, if the cartel prices are what you would be charging anyway because you can't charge cheaper because you're not very efficient, then for those members of the cartel, it makes sense to keep the cartel. The thing is, it's a syllogistic fact that cartel is made up of multiple different firms, and not all of them are going to have identical costs of production. Otherwise, they would have had identical prices anyway, in which case it's not really a cartel. They're actually charging what it costs for them to produce stuff, and the prices are just the same. There are more efficient providers, and they could make more money by lowering their costs and having a higher market share, and they do every single time. Like the idea, look, corporations try to form cartels all the time because it does seem like that would make sense. But at the end of the day, they would always break up, not because the government would break them up, not because of consumers, not because they wanted to help consumers, but because they wanted to make more money. And the more efficient members would always start undercutting the less efficient members. And as soon as it got out, the cartel would finish. And there's two books I always cite on this. One is In Restraint of Trade by Butler Schaefer, and the other is The Triumph of Conservatism by Gabriel Kolko. And I mentioned that to somebody once, and they're like, well, Butler Schaefer is a fucking conspiracy theorist, which, I don't know, that's probably true. That doesn't mean he's wrong about the robber barons or regulation during the progressive era. That's not a refutation of any of his arguments, and it's also completely missing the point that I provide always two sources on that. One of them is a libertarian, Butler Schaefer, and the other is a leftist, Gabriel Kolko. And I've never, and my response when I pointed that out was silence. He fucking had nothing to say. No refutation of Kolko, no refutation of his writings on the topic. And those are only, like the two that I like because I've read their books, and they're on the tip of my tongue. But they are not the only fucking sources on that information. And it kind of, in fact, if all you have to do is ask, name one cartel that that succeeded without government aid, or one monopoly that was created through the market and not through government aid, and the answer is it's never happened. And at some point you have to wonder, okay, if it's never happened, like, what's the basis of the assumption that it automatically would if it never has? I mean, it might be hypothetically possible, but it doesn't seem particularly likely, seeing as that it never came about. The government can enforce a cartel, and that's essentially what started to happen. The government can make producers raise prices in a uniform way, and it can punish them when they undercut each other, which is of course good for consumers. And that's what's actually happened. That's the real world of our economy, especially in medical care, on so many different levels, like on through the licensure, through the medical schools, through the AMA, through the hospitals, through like how many places can even provide, through who can produce the equipment, who can provide the equipment, how the equipment can be made, through the drugs, through the through the drugs, through the FDA. The FDA alone has got to be costing us, I don't even know, and I don't just mean in money, in lives. And you add all that together, and I don't know what the price of medical care would be. I don't think anybody does, but I think it's safe to say it would be substantially and probably several orders of magnitude, at least for most procedures. There's going to be some variance here. It's going to be that much cheaper, which means lots of things. It means, A, more people are going to be able to afford it. The number of people who are in a position where they can't afford it is going to shrink because the marginal cost is going to go way down. It also means that the charity is going to go farther for two reasons. A, fewer people need it. So let's say right now there's 20 million people who need medical charity. If the price of medical care was to decrease and the number of people who can't afford it, instead of being 20 million, became 2 million, then there's only 2 million people who need all the charity dollars, as opposed to 10 times that number. And again, arbitrary numbers to illustrate a point. Not totally arbitrary numbers, but just rough estimate numbers to illustrate a point. And second, the charity that does go will go farther. If the average medical procedure cost $100,000 and then it shrinks to costing, maybe say $4,000, then charity dollars are going to go much further. And again, fewer people will need them. It'll be much easier than to go into debt. It's one thing to go into debt $250,000. It's another thing to go into debt for $15,000, let's say. So the trend in the market is for quality of care, quality of goods and services to go up, and prices to go down over time, and for prices to approach the marginal actual cost of providing the service. There's not going to be, if there's a big gap, then that's a profit incentive for somebody else to come in, charge a lower price, get a higher market share. That's why it's always approaching that level. And nothing, even assuming that there's an inelastic demand on the part of consumers, does not change that logic. The only thing that can change that logic is if we assume that there is no competition, that there's only one provider or only a few, and then they're in a coherent cartel that actually holds. And the thing is, that never happens on the free market. That requires a violation of the free market. That requires a government intervention for either of those conditions to happen. And I don't think it's fair to criticize libertarians based on the assumption of an unlibertarian scenario, an unlibertarian assumption that there's going to be a state enforcing cartels or creating monopolies, and yet that is the actual necessary condition to produce the dystopian results, the libertarian results that leftists talk about. And again, it's reliant on their on different mythologies about what capitalists are going to be like. Oh, they're not really concerned. On the one hand, they only care about profits. They'll do anything for profits. And then on the other hand, what they only really care about is screwing consumers, or solidarity with their competitors. So on the one hand, they hate their competitors, will do anything to destroy them, including, become, warfare essentially. On the other hand, all they care about is being friends with their consumers, even if they can make higher profits by lowering their prices and taking a higher share of the market. They're not going to do that because their highest priority is, camaraderie with their competitors. Again, makes no sense. You're switching out worldviews left and right in an inconsistent way, and it's really kind of annoying. But yeah, so this is no way a comprehensive healthcare video, but I just wanted to address just that one point. So I'll talk to you all later. Bye-bye.